This is an edited recording of a presentation to a fire Zoom meeting on the 25th of March 2024. The presentation was given by Felicity Gillespie, the Chief Executive of Kindred Squared. Felicity is Chief Executive of Kindred Squared, a private foundation focused on improving the quality of early childhood development. She's a member of the independent expert panel advising Sir David Bell's review of early years, commissioned by the Labour Party. Felicity is a board member of Ofsted, advisor to the UK Department for Education since 2011, and has been the lead specialist academy governance advisor for 6 years.
I've never been in a room, virtual or otherwise, with so many eminent scientists, and I feel like a frightful fraud. I am not one of the esteemed members of our advisory board, the likes of Peter Fonagy and Alan Stein. I'm not one of them that developed this programme. I'm just the chief executive of Kindred Squared, which is the charity that funded it and came up with the idea. So I just want to sort of say that. The other thing, just another caveat, you can tell I'm caveating like mad because I had no idea this was the audience. So I'm slightly horrified by how simplistic you're going to find my thoughts. But the other caveat just to say is that this presentation is not typically made to people who know anything about the early years. We still, the point about Kindred Squared is our objective is to raise the public's awareness about why the early years matters. So it's about addressing the ignorance that the early years is the foundation for everything that follows, which of course all of you know, standing on your head with your hands tied behind your back. But it's amazing how many politicians, how many businesses, and indeed the public. We run an annual school readiness survey, and we've just found yet again this year that nearly half of parents, for instance, don't know what school readiness, have no idea what the developmental sort of norms are for a child starting school until the child turns 4. They haven't even heard of it. And, we do have a school readiness crisis in this country based on, I think, to a large degree, ignorance. And as a nation, as you know, we're not prioritising the early years in proportion to later phases of education simply because people still think that Key Stage 1 starts at 5. Well, I mean, what a nonsense. Obviously, Key Stage 1 starts when you're born, or some would argue when you're in utero. But certainly it doesn't start when you're 5. So that's the sort of context for the way in which we work. So we developed the SEEN project as a way of, if you like, as you say, getting in there before the children have even before the thought of having children, we hope, themselves is even a twinkle in their eye. So the idea is to educate the very basics, very high level, very simple concepts that at least will hopefully lodge to some degree so that when they do have a baby, with any luck, they'll have some vague sense that it's probably a good idea to talk to it. They can't really remember the rest of the lesson, but definitely somebody was talking about the need to talk to babies. So that's sort of the backdrop. That's where we come from. And I'm just thinking, so what you have to now do then is imagine if you can, 40 years ago when you didn't really know anything about the early years. And perhaps you're a politician that thinks that the be all and end all in life is Key Stage 4 data. So that's what you're working with. So the early years matter because, as you know, it's when our brains are growing fastest and it impacts everything else that comes. It's when our brains, that first year is absolutely critical. So the Key Stage 1 starting at 5 is really bonkers. There's no more technical term I can use. And of course, this is about context, and it's about the reason this is important is because we're starting to introduce to our audience the idea that it's the context, the nature of the relationships, the kind of engagement that has such a profound effect. Starting early is easier because of the brain's ability to change in response to experiences and that the amount of effort is so much less. Again, at this point, I'm a bit sad that I'm not hearing any oohs and ahs, because normally when you're talking to politicians, they're going, "Oh, that's amazing," like this. But of course, you've all written, some of you probably wrote this. So anyway, presentation. So there's Heckman, which I love the idea that I came before Heckman. Ha, ha, ha. Hilarious.
Hang on.
And then again, for businesses and for governments, and for political parties, this is a really key bit of thinking,
right.
that actually a stitch in time saves 9. Our grannies told us when we were children, and it applies here as well. So what does all that mean? What all that means is, if we look at the Key Stage 3 biology curriculum, if we look at the science curriculum generally, what are our children learning? Are they learning things that help them to become better parents and better adults? Do they understand what is going on in their brains and in the brains of their children as they're growing in the first 5 years, particularly the first 2 years? And there is no mention. So one of the things we know from politicians is the minute you mention the curriculum, their eyes start to roll. And unless you can say what you're going to take out, the conversation's kind of over.
Absolutely.
So I have absolutely no biology background at all, but I was just reading it as a layperson and thinking, some of these things just made me think, gosh, the changes in the environment, which may leave individuals within a species and some entire species less well adapted to compete, which may in turn lead to extinction. But I was thinking, well, what about the environments that lead to healthy human brain development? Or, what about ourselves, rather about just not learning about other animals, but about our own animal? And this is the conversation that at Kindred we're starting to have this year with the sort of biology and science community. What would you take out of the curriculum in order to make way for what is to follow, which is the SEEN curriculum? This is more, you will know about why the early years matters, public awareness is such an issue. I should just show you that, actually, that this was our survey this year. Teachers say that 1 in 4 children are starting not toilet trained. 50% of teachers say it's getting worse. A third of the teacher's day is lost providing support to children who are behind before they begin their school-based education. And interestingly, it's not just about what the current state is. We also have a situation where 50% of parents don't think it's entirely their job to be doing things like toilet training. Now, toilet training is what the media sort of immediately latches onto because it's an easy thing to kind of comprehend. But obviously, you'll all understand that, of course, the data is not just about toilet training. A third of children apparently are not able to eat independently or dress themselves, put their coat on independently. And there's all sorts of other data around holding a pen, following instructions, being able to articulate their feelings, having speech and language issues. 28%, interestingly, 28% of children, according to teachers, are unable to use a book, by which I don't mean read, I mean literally understand when you give them a picture book that you turn pages and they are busy swiping. So 28% of children are not turning the pages. So that's the sort of backdrop, which is quite thought-provoking for people that haven't written the book, as you all have, on this subject. And then we've got this huge issue of ignorance, which is what Kindred's really about. And if you've got half of parents and teachers thinking that the problem arises because parents are unaware, and you've got slightly more than half of teachers and parents thinking it's a problem because parents don't think it's their job. And 9 out of 10 parents blithely believing that their child is absolutely ready for school and developmentally in line with where they should be for their age. When that's the backdrop, our response to this is that we should be getting in younger. Every time you think about closing the disadvantage gap in education policy, I've worked in the school system for 25 years. Every time you keep thinking, every time you see a problem, we should be working with these children and their families younger. And then suddenly you find that you've popped out the bottom of school and you're into the early years. And actually doing this kind of work, we realized even the early years is too late. We need to get to the parents before they even become parents to start to have these conversations. And that's where the SEEN curriculum has come from. So it was developed by, we commissioned Oxford University, the psychiatry department, and they put together 2 advisory groups, one of international neuroscientists and one of sort of leading educationalists. So the first was about what should this content be, and the second was how do we make sure it's applicable in a classroom setting, and how do we make sure it links into all the other different bits of the curriculum in a way that's meaningful and deliverable. It's made up of 12 curriculum statements covering these 3 areas. So it's the kind of the neuroscience, it's what's going on, it's what impacts the way it goes on, so the influence of experiences, and then it's about the third lesson is about the evidence linking early years to long-term health impacts, and also the sort of making clear the sort of non-deterministic nature of early development, that it's not you know it's not too late, as it were. So this is the first lesson basically covers, and this is where you start to know much more than I do. This is where, whoops, hang on. This is where the academic panel put this together, is actually trying to synthesize everything down into 3 lessons was a real challenge. So it's about the concept of the brain being made up of internet connected neurons. It's about genetics and environment having a role. It's about, you know, the impact of experiences on neural circuits, and it's about what influences those circuits. Neuroplasticity is discussed, and a focus on the neuroplasticity in the early years and adolescence being the 2 key stages. And this content it was originally developed for Key Stage 3, but we have now developed it for primary settings, because we had so many primary schools saying they wanted to be doing it with year 5 and particularly year 6, but also year 5. So there's now a primary school version. And also what's really fascinating is the number of nursery providers who have said none of our workforce know any of this, which I find it staggering. How can you possibly have a qualification in looking after toddlers if you don't understand that this is why what you do matters? But anyway, so we're now working with CASH and with the qualification providers to include this content in their qualifications. So the second lesson is about the experience. If anyone wants to ask questions.
Sorry, in terms of early year teachers and nursery nurses qualifications, if they go in with the Association of Infant Mental Health competencies, all of this will be covered in the different levels of competencies that they have to go through. So if you go on to the AIM competencies, you'll see that it's going to be a part of the training accreditation.
Yes, but if you speak to nursery chains, we didn't suggest this. We developed it in association with those qualifications because we were asked to, because they were saying that so many of their workforce coming in with qualifications where they should know this stuff, they simply don't. And so that's the concern, is the quality of the training. And then there are also a number of qualifications, particularly provided by CASH, where this isn't included. I don't pretend to understand the ins and outs of all the different qualifications, but there are some qualifications where this stuff isn't involved. So we are adding it rapidly. So this is the second bit is about the experiences provided by the caregiver and why that matters. And all of this, you'll see the materials shortly, but all of this is delivered by teachers who have had the teacher training attached to the content. So it's about, yes, well, you can see the nature of the caregiver's behavior. And then the third is about the early years being the foundation for long-term physical and mental health, the non-deterministic nature of it, but also the resilience factor, that the importance of supportive relationships and developing skills, which I think for 12 and 13-year-olds can be quite quite a revelation, really. The resources, so all of our resources, the lesson plans, the materials, the teacher training, all of it's just available on our website. Anybody can download it and have access to it. And these are the overview. This is basically the content. And I should say up front that we specifically don't go into adverse childhood experiences or trauma, because we think that for an unknown audience of unknown age children and teachers who've had, you know, enough training to deliver this material, but certainly not to deal with anything that might be triggered as a result, that those areas are not included. So those are the 3 lessons. And then if I just give you a little look, so here's the theory.
These are good.
Nice.
And so
Well,
there we go.
What you learn from this is that a 2-year-old's brain is far more efficient than the grown-ups.
Yeah. And so then there's various, well, there's all sorts of resources that you can see. Sorry, just to give you a chance to have a look at that. And then lesson 2, which is the brain's environment, the role of the caregiver. We talk about responsive and reciprocal interactions, the sort of whole concept of serve and return, which is really fascinating. We did some filming of some of our classes in an all-through school where we did the Key Stage 3 lessons, and then we took the teenagers who'd done the lesson into the nursery attached to the school, and we just watched them hanging out with a bunch of toddlers. And it was absolutely extraordinary watching these teenage boys basically doing serve and return with the sort of children, and interacting in a way that the teachers found really amazing, actually, and quite unexpected. Executive function apparently is quite an interesting one to teach teenagers, because some of them apparently still struggle. And those are the resources we have. There's films, so there's lots of videos and worksheets and all sorts of things, because we're trying to make this as easy for teachers to deliver as possible. And there's lesson 3 theory, which is about the foundation, as I said. And as I say, all of this you can access on the website. So there we go, just that's back there. Questions. And then the research that we did. So the first year, Oxford ran as a pilot, and we ran it with about 4,000 students. And so there were online questionnaires. There was a compulsory quiz at the end of the 3rd lesson to see, to try and get a sense of how things had settled and been taken on. There were pre, post and follow-up individual quizzes. The whole thing was obviously anonymized. And then the staff also did evaluation questionnaires, because we wanted to get a sense of whether the staff thought it was worthwhile, whether they engaged with it, whether they enjoyed it, actually, because we thought, well, if anyone's going to do it, if the staff enjoy it, that really helps. And we got, you know, quite a bit of data out of it. We've now had over 20,000 children have done it. In the pilot year, almost 4,000 completed. There was an increase in knowledge. 100% of the teachers, 92% of the teachers said it should be taught to every student of their age. And going back to those questionnaires I talked about, the before and after, mean was for all pupils increased from 3.09 to 4.78. And that's basically the sort of end slide where we say to people, you know, if you want to join the community, that's the scan, and anyone can enter the community and talk to other teachers, talk to us, get hold of further training. We do offer bespoke training. So if we do a lot of work with academy trusts, And in fact, OGAT, the current Chief Inspector of Schools for Martin Oliver, he was the Chief Executive of Outward Grange Academy Group, and they were the first trust to have it, to deliver SEEN in every school in their trust. So where we have trusts signing up, we will go and do bespoke training, or we can tweak it to fit their own schemes of work. So that's basically it. Well, they're better than a poke in the eye with a blunt stick. That's what we say, you know. And whether what we don't know is whether the children that have done this are going to be in any way different as parents once they have children in 20 years' time. We have no idea how much of this will stick. But on the basis that some ethnography, we did ethnographic research, we had films of parents who literally had a baby sitting in a bouncy chair in the corner while they were chatting to their 4-year-old over the dinner table. And when asked by the researcher what's going on with the baby in the 8-month-old baby in the bouncy chair in the corner, and the dad, absolutely devoted to the 4-year-old, discussing footballing with great intensity, was saying, well, he's just a baby. There's no point talking to him. I mean, obviously, he's just a baby. He doesn't understand anything. So I'm talking to my son because we're talking about football because he can talk. But that's just a baby. So there's no point talking to them. You know, and in a situation, in a sort of society where that is absolutely prevalent still, and where we have this extraordinary data of the number of parents that simply don't understand what is going on in the brain in the early years, and an education system which continues to underfund the early years in proportion to later phases of education, actually doing this, it's got to be worth a go, is our rule of thumb. And we think it just needs to be in the national curriculum. We've been told actually by various politicians that they think it's a great idea and they've got no problem with it being in the national curriculum. But the key is, well, what are you going to take out? So that's I think the next phase of work that we need to get some expert help with is we're going to have to knock something else out of the science curriculum if we're going to have a crack. Some schools, I should say, actually delivered it through PSHE lessons. But as PSHE is a bit of more of a sort of wishy-washy place in the curriculum anyway, I think we think it belongs in the science curriculum.